Hello, fellow Robo Capitals. Hope you're well. So we have new data out again. Yesterday, ADP, and today the initial claims. And we haven't seen this type of data since 1969. That's no joke. I couldn't believe it when I actually saw that. Outside of the cerveza sickness, that didn't really count. But outside of the cerveza sickness, we haven't seen this since 1969. So let's get right into the action here. Great article, by the way, from Zero Hedge. I've been kind of rough on them this year because they turned so political, but they still crank out some good material from time to time. And this is one of those articles. So we've got a screen share here. Okay, cool. No hire, no fire economy. I actually did a whiteboard video this morning on the labor market, and I used this specific article. And the conclusion I'll actually give you the conclusion at the end of this video, because I think this is a very accurate representation as to what is happening with the labor market right now, because we're getting a lot of conflicting data. I mean, if you guys didn't watch the video yesterday, let's go right over to the calendar. And we had ADP come out with an expectation was 40,000 jobs, which, by the way, is terrible to begin with. We had a negative 32,000. Negative 32,000. That is terrible. And I think this is a good representation because it's all about the private sector. And at the end of the day, that's really the engine of growth, let's say, in the economy. Sure as hell isn't the government. So just before we get back to that really great Zero Hedge article, I want to pull up a chart for you guys. And this is a chart I used on today's whiteboard. Let me zoom in. Because this, when you look at this trend, it really starts to click. And you see just how extreme this is. And what I'm referring to is the ADP numbers over the last few months. So back in, look at where we were in August of 2021. We added 1.25 million jobs in 1 month. And then look what has happened. And of course, this is when the economy, when the government started to pull back their draconian measures for the cerveza sickness. So this is what you would expect. But we go from 1.25 million, and then we go right down here till we get a negative number in March of 2023. No surprise there, right around the time that Silicon Valley Bank blew up. And then we go a little higher, but you see where we are now, very, very low. And we had a little bit of a bump up in late 2024, where we got to 221,000. But then you see it go down, 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 down. But look at this trend, with the exception of this little bump here. The trend has been straight down, which I think is consistent with what we've seen in the real economy. It's pretty much gone straight down as well. And by the way, I mean, not since here, but right around here, the CPI, which is a lagging indicator, that came down as well. Now, it's not that we're having deflation, but we saw this disinflation, which would make sense when you look at the actual labor market and how it's getting much, much weaker. Is this an absolute collapse? No, not yet. It's not the GFC, but we have to go back and kind of look at, okay, what was happening? In fact, let's do that. Let's see if we can do that. Oh, shoot. I got to be a subscriber. Okay, well, I've done this through AI with that. I talked about a long time, about a year ago. I have this indicator, this recession indicator, and I looked at all of these inputs. I had like 40 or 50 of them to begin with, and I pretty much threw out most of them because it's like a coin toss. But there were a few there that were really impactful, that really had a strong leading indicator, or an indicator that, yeah, now it's not a leading indicator. It's a confirmation indicator, I think that's what I was calling it. And initial claims was part of that. And ADP, I mean, it's the whole entire labor market. So I would assume that ADP numbers were starting to turn negative probably 2007. But I would need a longer chart. In fact, let's do this, guys. Let's play around with it. And then we're going to get back to this zero hedge article. But this is really, really important because when you start getting negative numbers in negative numbers in ADP and negative numbers in non-farm, when you look at the revisions, I know the non-farm payroll right off the top of my head, and that usually only happens in an economic contraction. Sometimes it'll be like a weather event or something like that, but usually outside of some freak of nature, or a big strike at a huge employer like Walmart. Usually when you start seeing negative non-farm payrolls, even after revisions, that's the no bueno zone. That's when the stuff is hitting the fan, or at least you're getting economic contraction and a lot of times a recession. But look at this with ADP. We've had negative numbers the last 4 out of 6 months. So it's not like this is just a one-off here. I mean, this is now the norm. And wow. So now let's go back here before we get over to zero hedge. I know I'm bouncing around, but this is really important stuff. Actually, let me just let me go here and let's go back. And is this non-farm private payroll? No. That's not what we want. We want ADP. Oh, this might be it. Oh, same thing. It's not letting us go back that far. Well, that sucks. Maybe this will the weekly change. I thought the weekly. Oh, geez. Boy, we're dead end everywhere we go. All right, let's get back to zero hedge. This is the fun of doing these things live. Okay, so here we just nicked it during the cerveza sickness. But like I said, outside of that, we haven't seen this low of a number in initial claims. This low of a number, which is the complete opposite of what we saw yesterday with ADP and what we've been seeing with the other labor market metrics. We haven't seen this low since 1969, like we were saying here. Now, Zero Hedge is saying this probably has a lot to do with Thanksgiving. The reason is the majority of the decline or drop in initial claims is California, Texas, New York. They've got a lot of great charts here. So here you see the government firings. That's going down. So we're kind of, the Doge stuff is over. The Challenger report. Now, October was terrible. October was absolutely terrible. That was the worst October in, now, when I say worst, I mean the Challenger survey is asking the private sector employers, what their plans are for the future. And we saw the biggest layoff announcements, I think the biggest layoff announcements in October since it was like 2003, the early 2000s. But now we've got the November number, and that's risen to 70,000. And we've only seen that outside of 2022. We've only seen that since the GFC, or we haven't seen that since the GFC. And then when you look at the moving average for the initial claims, but then you look at the continuing claims and you're like, this initial claims, it's really an outlier. And here they have a couple reports that I'd never even heard of. So good job, Zero Hedge, for digging this up. This is the Revelio. And this is an alternative labor market signal, okay? It's more in line with ADP, where we're seeing a negative 9,000 for the month of November. And here we go back to Challenger, where they're not just talking about the layoffs, they're talking about the flip side of that coin, where, in these surveys, what are the businesses doing as far as hiring? And here we can see for this year, 2025 year to date, we've got about 500,000 planned hires. That's down 35% since, or relative to the exact same time in 2024. And this is the lowest year to date in hiring plans since 2010, right at the tail end of the GFC. And as you guys remember, going back that far, the labor market was terrible. I mean, the labor market was terrible even into 2012, 2013. Here's another one that I'd never heard of. The WARN, sounds scary, Act obliges employers with more than 100 full-time workers to provide written notice to the state and the workers themselves at least 60 to 90 days ahead of planned plant closings and mass layoffs. It is one of the best real-time reads on the labor market. Okay. And they've got this moving average, which is black, but then it looks like the kind of the real-time data here in gold, and they're circling this as a red flag, serious red flag. So with the labor market, you can't really just take the ADP number by itself. You can't just take initial claims by itself. You got to take all the data that we have. And when you do that, well, I'm going to get to my conclusion here in a moment. This is the unemployment rate. You guys know the direction that's going. The black is a moving average. This is a real time. The black is real time. The gold, oh, interesting, is from the NFIB small businesses. And this is the unemployment rate, let's just say with small, mid-sized business. And they're saying that they're firing a lot of people. And the main reason they're giving is poor sales. No surprise. I mean, this is, and with small businesses, you would think they cater more to the poor and middle class. And it's not just K-shaped recovery. Now it's like, the top part of the K is kind of going like this. But it's just the top 10% of people with assets. They're the ones that are propping up the whole economy as far as aggregate demand. And they're probably not the ones that are going to a lot of small businesses. Maybe they are. But I think that, it's like NVIDIA. Like NVIDIA, I was reading the other day, like 50, 60, 70% of their revenue comes from like 8 customers. So if those 8 customers are doing fantastic, then you look at NVIDIA and like, oh my gosh, they're doing well. So the economy must doing well. No, it's just coming from 8 people. And I think if you look at NVIDIA, it's very similar to what's happening right now in the real economy. So the conclusion that I wanted to go over with you guys, in my mind, is the labor market seems to be a lot like the housing market in the sense that there's just very few transactions. And I think that title from Zero Hedge was very good. We're living in this labor market where there's no fires, but there's no hires. And that, just like the housing market, that's not good. Like that is not good. So you say, George, why are we seeing negative numbers with ADP and non-farm? Well, you do have people quitting. And you probably have people quitting because they're retiring or whatever. And those people aren't being picked up in the initial claims because they're not filing for unemployment, because they're quitting for other reasons. But then what the businesses are doing is they're just not hiring people to replace them. And I think that's twofold. I think it's due to AI in certain instances. And it's also due to the fact that the economy sucks. I mean, aggregate demand down, right? No customers. If you have 100 employees and 10 of them are going to quit because let's say they all happen to retire next week, what's happening is those people are retiring and you're just not hiring them back. And then maybe you fire 2 people in addition to that. So you want 12 to go to reduce your payroll by that much. So you've got slight negative numbers on the non-farm and ADP, but the VAT, but you don't see it picked up in the initial claims because you only have 2 people filing for initial claims when 10 people, let's say, have actually quit for other reasons. So it's like a labor market where there's just no movement, and any movement that we do have is negative. But it's more so, it's not so much a result of just massive firing and massive layoffs. It's more so a result of just no hiring. And that ain't good. That ain't good. But we'll have to see how this plays out. I think usually in these cycles, just using some common sense, is you don't just go from, it's not like a light switch where you just go from everything's great to, oh my gosh, pants on fire, the stuff is hitting the fan. And that's why I like to go back to not just 2008, but I like to go back to 2006, 2007. And then you start to see the trends. You start to see exactly what we're seeing now, where it doesn't happen all at once. This is like the Titanic. It's a slow moving ship here. And it takes a long time for it to turn around and go the other direction. But when it does, then it goes really, really fast. Right? So tomorrow, going back to the calendar, big day. We got PCE coming out. Now it's unfortunately it's still lagged data. It's the data from September. But this is going to give us a really, really good read on what the Fed is going to do. Not that that matters too much, but it matters for the markets. I don't think it really matters for the economy because interest rates are really, A, the Fed doesn't really control interest rates, it kind of follow them. And B, interest rates don't really control the economy. They're more a reflection of the economy. But let's go over to the CME group. And right now we're clocking in at 87. And I think a lot of we saw about a 2% decline today into the probability that they do cut. I think that's directly from the initial claims we got today. But I think the market's kind of seeing through that because if you go look over at the 10-year treasury, it's up, but it's only up, 3-4 basis points. So definitely stay tuned for tomorrow's video when we go over that really, really important PCE number and see what that does to the odds of a Fed rate cut or a pause here in just a few days. All right, guys, on that bombshell, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. As always, make sure you're standing up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism. We'll see you in the next video.